The reddish dust from the dirt road rose like a dense fog, painting the windshield of the luxurious imported SUV with a dull film that the automatic wipers struggled to remove. Inside the vehicle, the silence was almost as thick as the dust outside. Ricardo, a man in his 50s, whose fortune in the financial market was as vast as his impatience, kept his eyes fixed on the rutted road, his hands firmly on the leather steering wheel. Beside him, his wife Helena, a woman of discreet elegance and a perpetually melancholic gaze, watched the arid landscape pass by in a blur, her thoughts miles away from that godforsaken backlands. In the back seat, the couple's teenage daughter Beatrice, or Bea, as she preferred to be called, was immersed in her own world, headphones blocking out any sound other than the electronic beats of her playlist. For her, this trip was a punishment, trading a summer vacation in Paris for an authentic experience in the Brazilian countryside sounded like a bad joke. The idea had come from Helena, who, in one of her therapy sessions, had been advised to reconnect with her roots and seek a purpose beyond charity events and afternoons at the country club. Ricardo reluctantly agreed, figuring that a few days away from the hustle and bustle of São Paulo might somehow soothe the chronic sadness that had settled in his wife since the loss of their youngest son Lucas years earlier in a tragic accident. The original plan was to follow a paved highway to a luxury inn with an infinity pool and a renowned chef. However, a blockage on the main road caused by a landslide forced them to take a detour. A shortcut, according to the map app, a route to hell, according to Ricardo. The midday sun beat down mercilessly, and the car's air conditioning, once an oasis of coolness, now seemed to merely recycle the hot, dry air. It was then that the car began to falter. First, a stutter, then a violent jolt. Finally, the engine died, leaving only the howling of the wind and the irritating buzzing of some unseen insect. Ricardo cursed, pounding the steering wheel in frustration. "That's all I need," he exclaimed, his voice thick with fury. He got out of the car, the immediate heat enveloping him like a heavy blanket. He opened the hood, thick white smoke escaping with an ominous hiss. He knew nothing about mechanics. They were trapped. Helena got out of the car, concern creasing her brow. "What's wrong, dear? What do you think? This overheated old thing decided to take a nap," he replied sarcastically. "That's a great idea of yours, Helena. Simply fantastic." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and unfair. Bea, sensing the tension, finally took off her headphones. "What now? Are we going to die of thirst? There's no cell phone signal here." As the family sank into their own private drama, a small, slender figure appeared on the horizon, walking slowly down the dusty road. At first, it was just a shimmering silhouette against the heat. As it approached, its contours became clearer. It was a boy, thin, dark-skinned with short, curly hair, wearing a worn t-shirt and shorts that had seen better days. He walked barefoot, his calloused feet seemingly impervious to the scorching ground. The boy stopped a safe distance from the car, watching them with large, curious eyes, a depth that seemed to contain more stories than his few years of life could possibly account for. There was a caution in his posture, the distrust of someone who has learned to expect the worst. Ricardo, irritated by the situation, looked at the boy with disdain. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice harsh. The boy didn't answer. He simply pointed to the smoking hood of the car and then to a barely discernible path that veered off the main road. His expression was serious, almost solemn. Helena, however, sensed something different. There was a quiet intelligence in his gaze, a calm that contrasted with the growing panic of her own family. She approached, ignoring Ricardo's silent warning. "Hello?" she said, her voice soft. "My name is Helena. Our car broke down. Do you know if there's a town or village nearby?" The boy finally spoke, his voice low and a little hoarse. "There's no town nearby, just the village, but the man who fixes cars died a long time ago." He paused, his eyes fixed on Helena's face. The head gasket's blown. It needs water, lots of water, and a tow truck. The accuracy of the diagnosis surprised Ricardo. "And how do you know that, kid?" The boy shrugged. "My father taught me. He was a mechanic." The use of the past tense didn't go unnoticed by Helena. Before she could ask more, the boy turned and pointed back to the trail. "There's water there, and people. If you want to wait, you can come. There are animals here at night." Without waiting for an answer, he began walking down the trail, disappearing into the undergrowth as quickly as he had appeared. The family was silent for a moment, the dilemma written all over their faces. Trust a strange boy in the middle of nowhere, or stay by their useless car, hoping for a miracle that probably wouldn't come. It was Helena who made the decision. "We'll go with him," Ricardo protested, but the determination in his wife's eyes was unwavering. Bia surprisingly agreed. "Anywhere is better than staying here cooking." Defeated, Ricardo locked the car, grabbed a small backpack with documents and water, and the family, displaced and vulnerable, followed the uncertain path indicated by the mysterious boy, entering a world they hadn't even known existed. The trail was narrow and winding, a dirt path that wound its way through Mandacaris and zik trees. The boy, whose name they didn't yet know, moved with impressive agility, his bare feet seemingly knowing every rock and root. The family, in contrast, stumbled with every step, their designer clothes and expensive shoes completely unsuited to the terrain. The sun continued to beat. Down, and sweat ran down their faces, mixing with the dust. After almost an hour of walking, just as despair was beginning to set in, the vegetation parted, revealing a small, hidden valley. There, nestled like a secret, was a village. There were a few houses, simple wattle and daub buildings with clay roofs, some whitewashed, others displaying the natural color of the earth. A surprisingly clear stream ran nearby, and the sound of children playing and a guitar being softly played broke the silence of the backlands. The boy led them to the largest, most central house, where a woman with braided white hair and sun-wrinkled skin sat in a rocking chair on the porch, weaving a hammock. She looked up as the group approached, her serene expression betraying no surprise. "Grandma, I brought people," the boy said. "Their car broke down on the road." The woman, who introduced herself as Donna Lucia, offered them fresh water from a clay jug, and the simple act of drinking that cold water felt like an invaluable luxury. She told them the boy's name was Samuel. "He's been my eyes and my legs ever since my children went to try their luck in the big city and never came back," she explained with a resignation that spoke of long years of waiting. Ricardo, impatient, got straight to the point. "Ma'am, we need help. We need a phone, a tow truck, anything to get us out of here." Donna Lucia smiled, a smile that showed a few missing teeth, but it was genuine. "My son, we don't have a telephone here, and the only car we had in the village turned into a chicken coop about 5 years ago. The truck that brings supplies only comes once a month, and it came last week." The news hit like a bombshell. They had been trapped there for at least 3 weeks. The panic on Ricardo's face was visible. Helena, on the other hand, seemed strangely calm. Bia, after the initial shock, began to observe the place with a curiosity she hadn't known she possessed. The village children, who had previously spied on them from afar, now approached, fascinated by the stranger's clothes and appearance. The days that followed were both an ordeal and a revelation. The family was welcomed into Donna Lucia's home, sharing the simple space and frugal food. Ricardo, accustomed to giving orders and having everything under his control, felt powerless and useless. He spent most of his time sitting on the porch, staring into space, stewing in his frustration. Helena, for her part, began to immerse herself in the village routine. She helped Donna Lucia in the kitchen, learned to weave with the other women, and spent hours listening to the matriarch's stories, tales of drought, loss, but also of unshakable faith and resilience. Bia, to her own surprise, befriended the local children, She taught them games she'd learned at school, and in return learned to climb trees, fish in the stream with her hands, and recognize birdsong. For the first time in years, she no longer felt the need to hide behind a cell phone screen. But it was Samuel who most intrigued and touched the family. The boy was a paradox. He had the wisdom of an elder and the innocence of a child. He cared for Donna Lucia, whom he called grandmother, with a touching dedication. He was the one who fetched firewood, who fixed what was broken, who knew the remedies of the forest. During the day, he would disappear for hours, and Helena discovered that he would go to the wreckage of an old, abandoned tractor where he spent his time reading old, dusty books, the only ones in the village. They were literary classics, donated by a teacher who had passed through years before. One night, as the fire crackled in the center of the village, Helena found Samuel sitting alone, gazing at the stars. She sat beside him. "Your grandmother told me that your parents," she began hesitantly. "They left." He finished without taking his eyes off the sky. "My father went first to get a job in construction. He sent a letter. Then, never again. My mother fell ill with grief, a fever that wouldn't go away. She passed away when I was 6. Donna Lucia raised me. She's not my blood grandmother, but she's the only family I have." The simplicity with which he recounted his personal tragedy struck Helena deeply. She saw in his eyes the same pain of loss that she carried in her own heart. But in Samuel, that pain was tempered by an acceptance and a strength she didn't possess. In that moment, a deep, silent connection formed between them. The drama, however, was far from over. A week later, one of the village children, a boy named Pedro, was bitten by a rattlesnake while playing near the stream. Panic spread. The nearest health clinic was a day's walk away, and anti-venom was a luxury non-existent there. While everyone else despaired, Samuel acted with eerie calm. He ran into the woods and returned with a bundle of leaves and roots, which he began to crush with a stone. Ricardo watched skeptically. "This is madness. He needs a doctor, not a child healer." But there was no other option. Samuel applied the poultice to the wound and prepared a bitter tea that he forced Pedro to drink. All night, he remained by the boy's side, monitoring his fever, changing the dressings, whispering words of comfort that no one understood. Ricardo and Helena's family, as well as the entire village, watched, in silence, witnessing the silent battle between life and poison. At dawn, Pedro's fever began to break. His breathing, previously labored, became more regular. The swelling in his legs subsided. Against all odds, the boy was recovering. The ancestral knowledge, passed down from generation to generation and absorbed by little Samuel, had saved a life. The event transformed Ricardo. He looked at Samuel no longer as a kid, but as a hero. Arrogance gave way to deep respect. He began to see the village not as his prison, but as a refuge, a place where a person's worth was measured not by their bank account, but by their courage and knowledge. He began to help, using his physical strength to carry water and mend fences, feeling a satisfaction no successful stock market trade had ever given him. The 3 weeks passed like a dream. The family, once fragmented and unhappy, found a new unity in this unlikely environment. Helena smiled more often. Bea discovered a version of herself she appreciated more, and Ricardo found a peace that money couldn't buy. The sadness of losing Lucas was still there, but now it was a gentle memory, not a gaping wound. They learned to live with his absence, filling the void with new experiences and connections. When the truck finally arrived, bearing the promise of a return to civilization, the departure was bittersweet. There were hugs, promises of help, and tears. As she said goodbye to Samuel, Helena felt a pang in her heart, as if she were leaving a piece of herself behind. She kissed him on the forehead and whispered, "You are a very special boy, Samuel. Never forget that." On the way back, in the towed car that would take them to the city, the silence was different. It was no longer a silence of tension, but of reflection. They were no longer the same people who had arrived on that dusty road. The experience had changed them in ways they were still beginning to understand. And at the center of this transformation was the image of a black boy, barefoot and wise, who had taught them the true meaning of wealth and family. Returning to São Paulo was a reverse culture shock. The skyscrapers seemed oppressive, the traffic an unbearable cacophony, and the luxury of their apartment, once so comfortable, now seemed cold and sterile. The high society conversations about trivialities rang hollow. The family felt out of place in their own environment. The experience in the village had left an indelible mark, a longing for something genuine that life in the metropolis didn't offer. Helena was the most affected. She spent hours in silence, her thoughts fixed on Samuel and the simple life of the village. The image of the boy, his resilience, his loneliness, and his precocious wisdom haunted her. She felt a visceral need to do something, to not allow that encounter to be just a travel anecdote. She talked to Ricardo, and for the first time in years they connected in a common purpose. They decided they couldn't simply forget. They had to return. 2 months later, they were back on the dirt road, this time in a more robust and well-equipped 4x4. They were no longer lost. They were returning home in a way. They arrived in the village with the car loaded with supplies, tools, solar panels to generate electricity, and most importantly, a team to drill an artesian well, ensuring clean water for everyone. But the biggest surprise was what they brought for Samuel. Boxes and boxes of books. Books of all kinds, from novels to encyclopedias, from mechanics manuals to world atlases. The boy's eyes shone with an intensity Helena would never forget. It was like giving water to someone dying of thirst. They spent another month in the village, helping to install the equipment and organize the new infrastructure. During this time, the family's relationship with Samuel deepened. He became Ricardo's shadow, absorbing every explanation about motors and solar panels. He became Helena's confidant, listening to her stories about Lucas, her lost son, and sharing her own silent pain. He became the older brother Bia never had, teaching her to respect nature and find beauty in simplicity. It was during one of these afternoons, while watching Ricardo and Samuel repairing the old tractor, that the idea, bold and terrifying, took shape in Helena's mind. She kept it to herself, letting it mature, fearful of Ricardo's, Bia's, and Samuel's own reactions. But the idea persisted, growing stronger, with each passing day, with each smile they exchanged, with each gesture of affection. The night before they left for São Paulo, Helena gathered the family and Dona Lucia on the porch. Her voice trembled slightly as she began to speak. "We can't live without you anymore," she said, looking at Dona Lucia. And then at Samuel. "This distance, it doesn't feel right. We wanted to propose something." She took a deep breath. "We wanted to invite Samuel to live with us in São Paulo, to study, to have the opportunities he deserves. And we wanted you, Dona Lucia, to come too. We would take care of you. We would have a big house with a garden where you could grow your herbs." The silence that followed was heavy. Dona Lucia looked at Samuel, her eyes brimming with tears. She knew the village was too small for the boy's dreams. Ricardo and Bia looked at Helena, shocked, but in their eyes there was no disapproval, but rather a silent understanding. Helena's proposal merely expressed a desire that already existed in everyone's hearts. Samuel, however, remained silent, his face unreadable. He stood and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the village that was his only world. The offer was the fulfillment of a dream he hadn't even dared dream. Access to a universe of knowledge and possibilities, but it meant leaving behind his roots, his history, the only life he had known. After several long minutes he turned. His eyes met Helena's. "I can't leave my grandmother," he said, his voice firm, and I can't leave my people, but I accept help with my studies. If you can help me bring a school here, bring more books, teach what I learn, then I accept." Samuel's response, so mature and selfless, was the real surprise. It wasn't the fairy tale ending Helena had imagined, where she would fill the void of her lost son with Samuel's presence. It was something much bigger and more meaningful. Samuel didn't want to be saved. He wanted to be the savior of his own people. And that's how the story took an unexpected turn. The family didn't adopt a boy, they adopted an entire village. Ricardo, using his influence and wealth, mobilized resources to build a model school in the village, with teacher accommodations and a library that became the heart of the community. Helena created a foundation to finance the project and ensure its long-term sustainability. Bia, inspired by the transformation, decided to study anthropology, dedicating her life to social projects. Samuel became the natural leader of his community. With the support of his family, he studied, graduated in agronomy through a distance learning program, and implemented sustainable farming techniques that transformed the arid backlands into productive land. He never left the village, but traveled the world to learn and bring back his knowledge. Years later, the forgotten village was an example of community development. The dirt road was paved, but the essence of the place remained intact. Ricardo and Helena's family never returned to São Paulo. They built a simple house in the village next to Dona Lucia's, and there they found the purpose they had long sought. The surprising outcome was not the adoption of a child, but the creation of a new family. A family forged not by blood ties, but by an unlikely encounter on a dusty road. A family that proved that true wealth lies not in what is accumulated, but in what is shared, and that love, in its purest form, is not about possession, but rather an impulse to make the other flourish. Helena couldn't find a replacement for the son she lost, but by helping Samuel realize his potential, she honored Lucas's memory in the most beautiful way possible, transforming the pain of loss into the seed of an extraordinary future for hundreds of people. And at the center of it all was Samuel, the boy who, by refusing to be saved, saved them all.